I was always a small kid growing up in a quiet town in Ireland. At age 9, I was barely 4'9" and weighed only 77 pounds. I wasn't particularly popular in primary school, but I had my small group of friends, four of us who stuck together through everything. We weren't the cool kids, but we were happy just being ourselves. Everything changed in fourth grade during a field trip to a forest park. Most of my classmates were playing a game called Bulldog Takedown, but I'd eaten too many chicken nuggets at lunch and wasn't feeling great. So I just sat on the sidelines cheering for my best friend who was playing. That's when this bigger kid from the popular group, let's call him the entitled kid, decided my non-participation was somehow a personal insult to him. He stormed over to where I was sitting. He demanded that I get up, telling me I was going to play whether I wanted to or not. I weakly protested, explaining that I didn't feel well and just wanted to watch. Before I could say anything else, he grabbed me by my shirt and dragged me onto the playing field. Then he lifted me up, I was basically weightless to him, and slammed me into the ground. I heard a crack and felt the most intense pain I'd ever experienced. My collarbone was broken. When the teachers rushed over, the entitled kid just shrugged it off. He claimed it was just an accident, and they were only playing bulldog. He got away with just a warning, but from that day on, I became his favorite target. For the next year, he made my life miserable with constant little accidents, stealing my pens, deliberately kicking balls at my head during sports, tripping me in the hallways. But the worst was yet to come. In fifth grade, our class went on a 2-day trip to an adventure center. No parents, just teachers supervising. The first night, all the boys were in one room, horsing around with some light roughhousing. The entitled kid saw his chance. He grabbed me while I was on the top bunk and threw me straight into a bed frame, blood everywhere. I needed stitches in my head. I finally broke down and told my parents everything. With tears in my eyes, I told them about how the entitled kid had been bullying me. They immediately decided to move me to a different school for my final year of primary school. I was devastated. I screamed at them, telling them they were ruining my life because I couldn't make friends easily. But a year later, we moved to Dublin, and everything changed. During those 3 years after the move, I had a massive growth spurt and discovered I had a talent for rugby. I worked hard and earned a scholarship to one of Ireland's most prestigious rugby schools, the kind that costs about €10,000 per year to attend. I didn't just play rugby, I excelled at it. So much so that I was chosen to sit on the scholarship board. There were 4 of us who decided which players would receive scholarships: the principal, our rugby coach, the director of rugby, and me. We needed a unanimous vote to grant a scholarship. One Wednesday during our regular meeting, who should walk in but the entitled kid? He clearly didn't recognize me at first. He spent 25 minutes talking himself up, bragging about his achievements and why he deserved the scholarship. I just sat there smiling, waiting for my turn to speak. The moment I opened my mouth, I saw recognition flash across his face. His confident smirk disappeared. I started questioning him about his leadership qualities, specifically asking about how he handled smaller or weaker players on his team. I spent the next 10 minutes systematically dismantling every claim he made, bringing up specific examples of poor sportsmanship from his past, without mentioning our history directly, until our coach finally had to step in. The coach quietly announced that they'd heard enough. He got 3 votes out of 4. Mine was the only no. His family still paid the full tuition to get him in, but by then, word had spread among the team about what he'd done to me years ago. Nobody wanted to practice with him. Nobody passed him the ball. Nobody sat with him at lunch. After 3 weeks of being completely isolated, he quit the team. A few days later, the principal called me into his office. He casually told me that the entitled kid had withdrawn from the school entirely. I didn't say anything, just nodded and walked out. But I couldn't help smiling, knowing that the kid who once threw me around like a rag doll had just been taken down by the power of a single no. I've been friends with my best buddy since college. We bonded over our shared love of terrible horror movies and even worse pizza choices. His family situation was always a bit complicated, but I never realized just how messed up things would get until his grandmother passed away recently. About 3 years ago, his grandfather died. Now, this wasn't just any ordinary family situation. His grandfather left behind his wife of 45 years, their 5 adult children, and 8 grandkids. Everything seemed normal during the initial mourning period, but that's when things took an ugly turn. The 5 kids, my friend's mom, her 3 brothers, and 1 sister, started getting antsy about their inheritance. They discovered that, due to some legal technicality in our state, since the house deed had both his grandparents' names on it, with "and" instead of "or", they were legally entitled to 50% of their deceased father's assets while their mother was still alive. One day, I was visiting my friend when this all came to head. The adult children were all gathered in the living room. The oldest son started the conversation by telling his mother that they had been patient but needed to discuss the house situation. When his grandmother asked what about the house, reminding them that she had lived there for 30 years and it was her home, the middle son coldly explained that the law entitled them to half of their father's assets. He broke down the math, stating that since the house was worth $200,000, they were due $100,000 split between them. The grandmother, clearly distressed, asked where she was supposed to go, repeating that this was her home. The daughter, showing no sympathy, suggested she could sell a house and divide the money, pointing out that she'd still get her half. The youngest son had the audacity to claim it was only fair and that it was what their father would have wanted. My friend told me his grandmother just sat there, tears streaming down her face as her children essentially forced her out of her own home. None of them, not a single one, offered to let her live with them. Instead, they forced her to sell the house and move into a retirement community with what little money she had left after paying them their fair share. But here's where it gets interesting. The grandmother, she wasn't going to take this lying down. Over the next few years, she orchestrated what I can only describe as the most elegant revenge I've ever witnessed. Without anyone knowing, she meticulously planned everything. She transferred her boat and 2 cars to her best friend's name. All her expensive jewelry sold to another friend. She even went as far as to sell all her furniture and started renting from the community center instead. She canceled her life insurance policy, which would have given each kid more money than they got from forcing her out of her house. She turned all her money into cash and gave it away to people who actually cared about her. She studied state law thoroughly and made sure there wasn't a single loophole her children could use to contest her will. She went on 4 senior cruises and maxed out several credit cards, buying gifts for her friends. When she passed away a few months ago, she left behind exactly $3,000 in assets, barely enough to cover a fraction of her funeral costs, which her children would now have to pay for. My friend discovered all this at the will reading. The lawyer began by announcing that according to their mother's final wishes, all her personal belongings, including kitchenware and linens, were to be divided among her children. The middle son immediately demanded to know about her savings and life insurance. When the lawyer told them there was no life insurance policy and that all other assets had been legally transferred or sold before her death, the daughter erupted, insisting there must be hidden money somewhere. The lawyer calmly explained that everything was done according to state law and the only contestable assets amounted to $3,000, which wouldn't even cover the funeral expenses they were now responsible for. Some of the credit card companies are now coming after her estate, meaning her kids might end up owing more money than they initially forced out of her. My friend is devastated, not just because he lost his grandmother, but because he discovered how terribly his parents and aunts and uncles had treated her. He had always assumed she chose to move to the retirement community on her own. He feels guilty that he never knew the truth until it was too late. The only thing that gives him some peace is knowing that his grandmother went out on her own terms, giving one final lesson to her greedy children. While it's sad that the grandkids, especially the younger ones around 10 years old, were also cut out, we figure she probably knew their parents would try to get their hands on anything left to the grandchildren anyway. So now, instead of the substantial inheritance they thought they'd get, my friend's mom and aunts and uncles are left with nothing but some old plates, worn blankets, and a stack of credit card bills. I'm a 16-year-old girl who loves collecting charms for my bracelet. It's not just any bracelet. It's my pride and joy that I've been working on for the past 3 years. Every charm represents a special moment or achievement in my life, and I've literally walked over 100 miles to earn some of them through various challenges and activities. Last month, my parents surprised me with a cruise vacation. I was beyond excited since I'd never been on one before. The first few days were amazing. The food was great, the activities were fun, and I met some really nice people my age. On the fourth day of the cruise, my dad asked me to grab his sunglasses from our room. I was making my way through the ship's corridor when this little girl, probably around 7 or 8, approached me. She complimented my bracelet and asked where I got it. I smiled and explained how I had to walk hundreds of miles to collect all the charms, participating in different challenges and events. She seemed fascinated, thanked me for telling her, and ran off toward what I assumed was her mother. They headed to the pool area. About 10 minutes later, this massive woman came storming toward me like a battleship on a mission. She greeted me with fake sweetness, calling me sweetie. I awkwardly returned her greeting. She then started complimenting my bracelet, before adding a guilt-tripping comment about how sad it was that her daughter didn't have one. I immediately knew where this was going. I've read enough stories online to recognize the signs. Sure enough, she asked if her daughter could have my bracelet. I politely refused, explaining that I had worked hard for it and didn't want to give it up. She tried to argue that since I was a teenager, bracelets like that were more suitable for little girls like her daughter. I stood my ground and refused again. That's when she completely lost it. There was no build-up, no warning. She went straight to nuclear. She started calling me horrible names and threatening me, saying things would get messy if I didn't hand over the bracelet. I have anxiety, and at this point, I could feel my heart racing and tears welling up in my eyes. When I refused one final time, she exploded in rage, screaming at me about raising my voice to my superior and demanding the bracelet. Before I could react, she grabbed my wrist and started yanking at my bracelet. Her nails dug into my skin, breaking it and making me bleed. Through my tears, I asked what was wrong with her, to which she just sneered that I deserved it for being disrespectful. Just then, my dad showed up. He had gotten worried when I took too long to return and came looking for me. When he saw this woman hurting me, his face turned red. He demanded to know what she was doing. To my complete shock, she claimed she was teaching her daughter, apparently meaning me, to be less selfish and share with her little sister. The situation got even more bizarre as she tried to call me Marisa and ordered me to return to our room. When my dad asked if she was my mom, she actually had the audacity to confirm it. My dad pointed out how funny that was, considering he was my father and hadn't married someone like her, calling her a pig. She got even more enraged at the insult, still maintaining her delusion. My dad then challenged her to prove I was her daughter by asking for my name. She confidently called me Marisa again, even telling me to stop lying when I tried to protest. My dad corrected her, and I pointed out that my real name was clearly visible on the passenger name tag we were all required to wear. Right then, the little girl came back from the pool still dripping wet. The scene got even more absurd as the woman tried to convince her daughter that I was her sister. The little girl innocently responded that she didn't have a sister, completely destroying her mother's lies. She turned ghost white as security officers approached. They'd already been called by my dad, who had texted them while confronting her. The woman ended up getting arrested right there on the ship. When we got back to port, my dad pressed charges for child endangerment and attempted kidnapping of a minor. She was sentenced to 6 months in jail, had to pay for our entire cruise, which was about 1/400, and was banned from the cruise line for life. I heard later that her husband divorced her after this incident, saying this wasn't the first time she'd tried to steal from other passengers on various cruises. I still have my bracelet, though now it has an extra special charm, one that reminds me of the time I stood up to the craziest Karen I've ever met. After retiring from 40 years of teaching high school mathematics, I found myself with plenty of time but a fixed income. My wife passed away 2 years ago, and I've since learned to be more careful with my spending. One of my favorite discoveries has been this local grocery outlet store. It's become something of a treasure hunt for me. You never know what gems you might find on their shelves. That particular Tuesday morning started like any other. I had my shopping list ready, though I always keep an eye out for unexpected deals. The store wasn't too crowded, just a usual morning crowd of retirees like myself and a few young parents with their children. I was in the snack aisle comparing prices on some crackers my grandkids love when I heard a loud crash followed by what sounded like dozens of small packages hitting the floor. I looked up to see a woman, probably in her 70s like me, standing there with her hands covering her mouth in shock. Her shopping cart had knocked over an entire display of marshmallow bags. I offered to help her with the cleanup. The woman looked relieved that someone was offering assistance instead of criticism. She thanked me profusely, explaining how embarrassed she was and that her cart had just caught the edge of the display. I assured her it wasn't a problem, mentioning that these displays could be tricky to navigate around. Together we started picking up the scattered bags. Some had rolled quite far down the aisle, but between the two of us, we made quick work of it. As we restacked them on the display, I could see her hands were shaking slightly. She confessed that she had been worried someone would be angry, explaining that her arthritis makes her a bit clumsy sometimes. I comforted her by saying that everyone has their moments and the important thing was that nothing was damaged. We exchanged pleasant goodbyes and wishes for a good day before going our separate ways. I went back to my shopping, picking up some discounted coffee and a few canned goods. When I finally made my way to the checkout area, all three open lanes were packed. Each shopper ahead had carts full to the brim, and I resigned myself to a long wait. I chose the line that seemed shortest and settled in. That's when I heard shuffling behind me. A woman, probably in her 60s, called out to get my attention, saying she was in a hurry. I turned around to see her holding only a few items in her hands. I politely explained that we were all waiting our turn. She became agitated, insisting that since she only had 3 items, people with full carts should let her go first. I was about to explain that's not how lines work when a store clerk appeared beside me. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with a friendly smile. The clerk asked if I would mind following her to another register. The woman behind me immediately protested, claiming she had been waiting longer and should go first. The clerk said it was a management decision and asked me again to follow her. The woman, growing more upset, demanded to speak to a manager. The clerk led me to a closed register, ignoring the woman's increasing volume. As I started to reach for the lane closed sign, thinking they were opening a new line for everyone, the clerk stopped me. She explained that the sign should stay there as this register was just for me. When I expressed my confusion, the clerk revealed that the woman I had helped with the marshmallows earlier was actually the store manager's mother, and they wanted to thank me for my kindness. Behind us, the angry woman continued protesting, declaring it was outrageous and threatening to call corporate. That's when the store manager stepped in, introducing herself and explaining that she made the decisions about register operations. She defended the decision to serve me separately, citing my earlier kindness to her mother and inviting the angry woman to call corporate if she wished. The woman's face turned red as several other customers in line who had witnessed her behavior started chuckling. She dropped her items on a random shelf and stormed out, muttering about never shopping here again. The store manager then explained to me that her mother had severe arthritis and accidents like that really upset her. She appreciated that I had helped when most people just walk by or give dirty looks. I humbly dismissed it as just being neighborly, but the clerk insisted they appreciated customers like me. It's nice to know that small acts of kindness don't go unnoticed.